In DC, for DC. DC Radio, 96.3 HD4 and DCRadio.gov.
Thank you, deep voice person with the funky backbeat. Indeed, this is not a council hearing. This is hearing the council. You can't have a government without a council, so you can't have a government radio station without a council show. This is it. We're coming to you from the Train Track Enclosed Nerve Center. That's the headquarters of the Office of Cable TV, Film, Music, and Entertainment. It's also the historic headquarters of Black Entertainment Television, so it's an honor to be here. Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to celebrate this thing called the Council. I'm Josh Gibson, Director of Communications for the Council. You may also know me as the Council's voice on social media, at Council of DC. If you don't follow us already, get with the program. Here at the Council, our communications goal is to engage with residents in an informative, conversational, and sometimes even enjoyable way. You know, if you follow us on Twitter, we're believers in the Mary Poppins School of Communications. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. We want to make it easy for average residents to understand what the Council does. We're demystifying our work and the people who do it. Remember, the DC Council is just like your workplace, except with the dais. On the show, we try to keep things light, offbeat, informal, and interesting. You'll learn about policy, learn about people, learn about history, and learn about the institution. Listeners, as you know, we've done a number of interviews with council members. They're available on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts, as always, plus a variety of new outlets, including iHeartRadio. So be sure to check us out wherever you listen to the fun stuff you put in your ears. The earlier rounds of interviews mainly consisted of getting to know the council members, their backgrounds and biographies, successes and struggles. Now in this round, we're going to focus more on the people at the council, colleagues, coworkers, constituents, and the like. And a quick disclaimer, we shared the general questions in advance with the council members so they could prep if they wanted to, and they can pass on questions if they choose to as well. So now, without any further ado, let me welcome back Ward 5 Council Member Kenya McDuffie.
Delighted to be back with you, Josh.
To facilitate things, we are doing the interview in Ward 5.
Which makes it easier, and I love that anybody who comes to interview with you has to come to beautiful Ward 5.
Exactly. It's a bit of a throwdown. You got to come to McDuffie's territory Exactly. If you want to be on here in the council. Well, yeah, like I said in the intro, we're focusing on people this time around. And the first question is, talk to us about a role model. And if you have one of each, that'd be great. If there's one in your personal life, and if there's one kind of a famous person or historical person.
Sure. So I have more than one role model in my personal life. And I also have one who's famous but no longer with us. And I've referenced this person before. And in fact, I've introduced legislation bearing this person's name. But Charles Hammond Houston has been a role model for me ever since I became interested in the practice of law. After graduating from Howard University, pursuing law school as a career to be a lawyer, I looked to try to identify with people or who reflected sort of value system and things that I was interested in. I always had an interest since Howard University in civil rights and looking at the plight of people of color in the United States in general, but black people in particular. And Charles Hammond Houston, to me, is just somebody who has made such an indelible impact on me, but on the country, whether people know it or not. And what do I mean by that? People have generally heard of Thurgood Marshall, right? Your first Supreme Court Justice of the United States of African American race. Charles Hammond Houston was his mentor. He was the person who was at Howard University Law School when Thurgood Marshall was matriculated, and he was the person who laid the groundwork for a lot of the civil rights successes in the United States Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall and others who are part of that legal team get credit for Brown v. Board of Education. But Charles Hammond Houston was the one who helped to come up with those legal theories, in fact, decades before Brown v. Board of Education. And so when I think about a role model, somebody who I've looked to personally to try to replicate things that he did, and who I've been frankly inspired by is Charles Hammond Houston. Personally, it's my mom. And as I mentioned earlier, I have more than just one personal role model, but my mom stands out because she and my dad really provided a warm and loving household for my siblings and I growing up. And although I lost my dad a few years ago, my mom was always the one who managed to keep the family together, and even in good times. I mean, she just was the one who you could see was so strong and solid as a rock, who always put her faith first, her family next, and then service to others. And those are the types of things that, while I didn't know it necessarily growing up as a young kid, that I'm certain impacted me, particularly on my formative years. And so I still carry with me that sense of faith, family, and service, which my mom really provided the example and continues to provide the example for. Even today. But I also have a couple others, and I won't go into a whole lot of details, but people like Paul Quander, who sadly we lost too early a few years ago, was a close personal family friend who I met as a young kid growing up in Stronghold because he worked closely with my godmother. And when I discovered that there were ways for me to impact my community, and ways for me to really serve as a lawyer, I looked for examples of people who were successful, who were sort of like me, right? I didn't want to look to simply the folks who I had to read about. I wanted to look at folks who I could see and meet and talk to, and Paul Quander was one of those folks who always opened his doors, who always answered my call, who always imparted sage advice and counsel, and even hired me after I lost my first election for council and needed a job. Paul Quander called me up and invited me to come in and help to advise him as the deputy mayor for public safety and justice, as well as at the time he was acting as chief of staff to then Mayor Vince Gray. And then lastly, really quickly, it is a person who's not much older than I am, but who's been such a dear friend and a mentor and frankly a role model who's helped to inspire my career and helped me to make the tough decision to leave the Postal Service to go back to college, is Roger Fairfax. He's a lawyer. And somebody I've known for decades. Our families have been close since before we were even thought about. His mom and my dad grew up together in the same neighborhood in Stronghold. And when we were growing up in the 1980s and 1990s, and we were experiencing, much like a lot of other communities across District of Columbia, the just horrible violence and just everything associated with gun violence in the District of Columbia, being the murder capital of the United States. Roger managed to stay amazingly focused on his studies, on school. Not that he didn't obviously have challenges that faced everybody else in the community, but he set about certain goals and he accomplished them. He left our neighborhood of Stronghold and graduated from Archbishop Carroll, where he was a senior and I was a freshman, and went off to Harvard University. He got a master's at the University of London and went off to Harvard Law School. I'd never seen anybody in my neighborhood doing anything remotely close to that I was aware of. And so it was quite the image of seeing that sort of success in a neighborhood of mine where it was blue collar, working class, and a lot of great people in the community growing up, and some of whom are still around. But that example of actually leaving the neighborhood, going to college and becoming a lawyer, he's been right there in my corner and was always available. And in fact, even when I didn't solicit his advice, he was there to offer it and provide guidance and counsel. So those are some of the folks who I look at as role models who have personally inspired me. And in the case of my mom and Roger, still today, I'm inspired by them and still count their advice and counsel whenever I have to make really tough decisions.
And I think, speaking of role models, one thing I've learned from talking to you all is that most of you are less in the category of Mr. Fairfax, who kind of like left the neighborhood, took off like a rocket, and the rest is history. Yeah. A lot of you guys struggled, and I think there's a more powerful role model example to our youth in that, because all the storybooks are just, well, they did great and everything went wonderfully, and I would much rather have them look to someone like you who had kind of ups and downs and who worked, certainly. Walked a postal route and that kind of stuff. That I think is more meaningful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And let me be clear. I don't mean to suggest that Roger had it easy, because he had just as many ups and downs as I had, and I was there to experience some of those ups and downs with him. But I will tell you, I certainly experienced my own fair share of ups and downs growing up in the neighborhood, experiencing what I would hope no young person would have to experience, some of the violence and seeing it firsthand and actually, physically being present and carrying that trauma with me still today. I think I've been able to channel it and harness it and use it in the work that I do today. But I know that some people have not, who've experienced similarly the things that I did, weren't able to really turn it around and see the brighter side of their experiences at the age that we were growing up in. I mean, I told a crowd at the African American Real Estate Professionals Gala, they gave me an award last week, and the person who introduced me said, I wonder if the Kenya McDuffie of 20 years ago ever envisioned the Kenya McDuffie of today. And I had to explain to them that I simply didn't. 25, 30 years ago, growing up in the neighborhood, I aspired to be like the images of success that I saw in my neighborhood, and it was government workers, right? My mom, worked at the Library of Congress. My dad was an electrician for D.C. government, DPW. And I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be like Mr. Butler, who carried mail for years and walked to work every single morning. I'd see him walking down North Capitol Street faithfully, dutifully, and I wanted to be like them. So it wasn't until Roger said, along with him, and my mom and dad always encouraged me to go to college, but I think I've shared this with you before, Josh. By the time I got to 12th grade at Woodrow Wilson High School, both my brothers who have helped to shape who I am today, who I really count as equally as inspirational as my sister and my mom and dad, but they had both dropped out of college. And so looking at them and seeing that they weren't successful in college, I didn't even bother. Didn't apply to a single college because I just didn't see it as a viable path. And so to have Roger, to eventually have met my wife, who similarly was encouraging of me, going to college, those experiences, those trials and tribulations, I carry them with me today, and I view the work that I do at the council through the prism of my youth and my upbringing in that small, close-knit community of Stronghold.
Yeah, I forget and I promise it'll make sense where I'm going in a second. I forget which martial art it is. I think it's jiu-jitsu, where you use the power of the attack against you to defend yourself. Yeah. And I feel like that is the skill, that's kind of the essence of what some of our council members who grew up struggling and grew up with the tougher side of D.C. during hard times, that's the skill set. Yeah. Is you were attacked, things were done in your community that are unspeakable, were done to you that were unspeakable, sometimes by members of the government. Mm-hmm. And your ability to take that attack and turn it and use it back as a defense and as your own strength. To take someone else's strength and turn it into your own is a talent.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that because, I think some people look at me and perhaps look at, Trayon or look at Robert White and think of us as the exception to the rule. And I don't want to speak for them, but there are young men and women in my neighborhood who grew up with me who were far more talented, in so many ways than I was, who just didn't simply get the opportunity, who but for an arrest, but for the use of drugs and addiction, but for having lost a parent either to violence or to Vietnam, just didn't get the same opportunities that I got. And so I continue to count my blessings and understand that I did not get here on my own by any stretch of the imagination. I had people who constantly reached back to give me a hand up, who thought more of me than I thought of myself during those times, and wrapped their arms around me so tightly that I had no choice but to think about things outside of what I was experiencing around me, which was, again, violence, addiction, early child birth, early death, and despite all those things, I still had family. I had my immediate family, but I had an extended family, aunts and uncles who loved on us. I had people in my neighborhood, other people's parents who would always offer a compliment or weren't afraid to send a stare my way when I was doing something that they knew I shouldn't be doing, or to call my mom or dad to tell them that I was veering in the wrong direction. And so that sense of community, again, even perhaps when I wasn't aware I was being influenced by it, I was certainly being influenced by it, because I look around today and while I love my house and I love my neighborhood, which is the same neighborhood that my dad grew up in, it's different now. You don't have Miss Mason and Mr. Mason 3 doors up who had kids who grew up in the neighborhood. You don't have Miss Spencer or Miss Abney. Those folks have passed away, and in some cases the houses have been sold, and it's just a different neighborhood. So adjusting to that, my dad grew up. He would tell stories about hundreds of kids in the neighborhood who played together, who played sports, and in fact, the neighborhood is called Stronghold because of sports teams, right? And then you had my neighborhood when I was growing up as a kid, and there were fewer kids than sort of the baby boomers, but nonetheless there were lots of kids, and we played baseball and football and basketball on a court in the back of my house on concrete alleys, and we learned so many lessons growing up. But I look around today, and my daughters just don't have that same sense of I think friendship and just the number of kids running around the alleys, riding bicycles up and down, and just getting into trouble and just building those bonds within your community. And so those changes, I know, are also some of the changes that have contribute to the just high levels of social and economic anxiety that I think we're hearing from long-term residents throughout the District of Columbia. And so I see my job as trying to work with new residents, but also work with the residents who've been here for a really long time, and help to shape the district and mold it into what it is today, during some of the toughest challenges that we had in the 80s and 90s.
That makes sense. So we went super long, thanks to both of us, on the first couple. No, it's me too. It was good sort of vignette, good look back at life in the district. We're going to do a couple of quicker questions, and then we want to leave time for the fun closeout round.
Sure.
Because this one is people have had fun with. So we talked definitely about your family, about role models. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your about your colleagues. You
Sure.
know, who are some colleagues that you see? You mentioned a couple of them earlier, Robert White, Trayon White. Who are the colleagues you look to that you work particularly well with, or maybe there's some who are different from you that you learn from?
I'd say I work well with my colleague, Ward 4, Brandon Todd. I think our close proximity, sharing a border, sharing communities that have similar qualities. We work really well together, not only legislatively down to the council, but also, we run into each other frequently in the community because we have those borders. So at Lamont Riggs Civic Association, or when it comes to Main Street that we share, I'm frequently in contact with Brandon and covering issues that we both confront, given the similar demographics of our wards. Chairman Mendelson, though, is somebody who I've really developed, I think, a pretty close relationship with over the years. Being Chair Pro Tem, being one of the longer serving members of this particular council, I've had an opportunity to work with him closely on a number of things, whether it's things like short-term rental, which had its ups and downs, and I know he had a hearing today on the implementation that I wasn't able to make it to, but I think that's an example of a really tough measure that we had to work together on to get it to where it was. I introduced it a few years ago, and it was referred to his committee, and because he has oversight of DCRA, and over the years we've worked with stakeholders on either side of the issue to really get it to a place where I think residents across the district will be proud, whether they like the outcome and the ultimate sort of policy direction that we headed in. I really appreciate how we work to get to where we are today. And then there are colleagues that I simply have learned things from. David Grasso doesn't always bring the same perspective that I bring to the work, but I find that he's always open to sharing his insights in how he ended up on particular areas, right? And so, I think some people look at some of the things that he's done, and I look at some of the things he's managed to do, and we've worked together on things like some of the legislation around breweries and distilleries, and really helping to create and foster and nurture that industry before it was what it is today, and so I've appreciated that. And he also has that perspective of having spent significant time in the District of Columbia and working at places like Colonel Brooks Tavern, and so and he lives in Ward 5 too, I've always appreciated working with him. Anita Bonds is somebody who I knew before I was elected to the council because of her activism and as also the fact that she resides in Ward 5, and so I've seen her at work in the community long before I was on the council, and also before she was on the council too. And so those are some of the folks who stand out. I have immense respect for the work that other colleagues are doing too, and I could go down the list of each of them and point out some of the things that I've learned. The experiences that I've seen, both with Brianna Nadeau of Ward 1 going up against an incumbent like Jim Graham, who was an institution in that community, and who had managed to build relationships across the demographics, whether it's race and economic level. He had support from all quarters, and the sort of coalition and the campaign that she put together was very impressive, and I think her tenure has been equally as impressive, and so I've enjoyed working with her as well. Alyssa Silverman is somebody who I don't always see eye to eye on policy issues, but who, to me, I appreciate because of how hard she works at her job. And I've seen that, and it comes out, I think, in the passion that she demonstrates on issues. And I know previously I had looked at some of her work when she was at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, when I was running for council the first time, and the work that she had done around workforce development programs. And I always sort of kid with her about referencing that when I was running for office, and when she got down there, she continues to work at those really tough issues around workforce development, making sure that we're funding programs that actually return an investment for our district residents. And so again, a number of colleagues I think have done amazing work, including Vincent Gray, who I really admire for his resiliency and his courage, given everything he's encountered in his career. So I could, if I had more time, go down that with everybody.
No,
but I'll
hear
stop
you.
right there.
Yeah, sadly, we're tighter on time. We could do a half hour on each question. Just real fast, are there any advocates or constituents that you kind of want to shout out for being particularly effective or having an impact on
absolutely. I'm, as we speak, I've been working closely with activists in the Don't Mute DC community. They've developed a really strong movement, which I think everybody, perhaps your listeners already know what happened with Donald down at the Metro PCS on the corner of Florida Avenue and 7th Street. And when he was asked to turn the music off, the way that the community came together almost instantaneously with the pop-up Go-Go's at the corner of 14th and U Street at that same intersection of Florida and 7th Street, they've turned that into a movement which inspired me to introduce a bill to make Go-Go the official music of Washington, D.C. And so I'll shout out everybody associated with the Don't Mute DC movement, including people like Ron Moden, Natalie Hopkinson, and so many others who have really, Cam Poles, who came to me about, trying to figure out how we can more officially recognize go-go music. And so I'll shout them out for all the work that they've done and they continue to do for go-go music, which to me transcends the homegrown genre of music and impacts the community more broadly, because I think it sort of epitomizes what I talked about earlier with the sort of social and economic anxiety that so many people are feeling. And so they should continue to do what they're doing and make sure that it is capturing folks and empowering them to have a voice down at the Wilson Building, because when they come together the way that they have and they advocate for issues, people listen.
So now we're going to go to the closeout questions real fast. Now, basically what we're going to do here is I'm going to name some kind of oddball tasks, and I want you to say which of your current colleagues you think would be best suited for them and why. But this is total speed round, okay?
I'll do it really fast.
Okay, so assembling IKEA furniture.
I would say Phil Mendelssohn.
Phil Mendelssohn, you're not the first.
Because he's always in the weeds and the minutia.
You're not the first to say that. How about at a, let's see, how about driving cross country? Which colleague would you get in a car and drive cross country with?
I would say Alyssa Silverman, because she's the one who I think I know the least about, who I find interesting and want to know more about.
Okay.
So having all that time would probably give us some time to chat about and share each other's stories.
That makes sense. How about, and maybe a number of them already have, but who would you bring home to meet your family?
I would like to bring home Robert White. They already kind of know Robert, but I think we have so many similarities. Sort of both having grown up in the district, having two young daughters, and so I think I'd like to sort of bring him home so my girls can meet his girls, and kind of, I think it'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about compiling a musical playlist?
I think Charles Allen probably has some stuff that I might want to hear.
Tell me more, because you were the first one to quote Charles Allen as a musical
because I just
inspiration.
I know Charles, and I know sort of him from his time as chief of staff at Tommy Wells, and he sort of has a cool side to him that I don't know that I have an opportunity to explore. And so I'm curious as to what he actually has in his playlist. And so I'm in terms of music, I'm straight hip hop, R&B. On the other hand, I'm open to all types of genres. And so I would imagine that he's not sort of pumping Jay-Z the way that I do, or go-go as frequently as I do. So I'd be open to it.
Yeah, you got to get past the Eagle Scout a little bit.
I was a Cub Scout.
Okay, and let's do one more,
okay,
because this is my favorite. Fighting off barbarians.
I would say Mary Che.
Mary Che always wins the barbarians.
Yeah, she just seems like she has a knack for fighting off all types of stuff. And she's also gotten a tattoo on her bed. And so I think I want her in a foxhole when I go up against some barbarians.
There you go. All right, another vote for Mary Che and the Barbarians, which would be a great band name, by the way.
I love it.
Well, anyway, sorry, we've just flown through our half hour, but thank you again so much for joining us. Thanks for being generous with your time.
Absolutely.
Truly
Always
appreciate
a pleasure
it.
to be here with you, Josh.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us. Tune in again next time. We are DC Radio at 96.3 on your HD4 dial, dcradio.gov. I'm Josh Gibson. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. Thank you.
In DC, for DC. DC Radio, 96.3 HD4 and dcradio.gov.